Gauteng province. We are going to go through this paper 2, our history paper 2, and we are going to try to elaborate and try to assist each other on how best we would be possible, it would be possible for us to get the right answers for the given questions. Right, so that's our paper. And as usual, we understand our paper 2 has the same structure as paper 1. We have 3 source-based questions, and we also have 3 essay questions. And our focus for paper 2, we understand, for question number 1, it's we're looking at civil resistance, which is from the 1970s to the 1980s. We are looking at the crisis of apartheid in the 1980s. Our focus area, we are looking at the different formations that were put in place by the South African community in an attempt to challenge the apartheid regime. Then question number 2 is the coming of democracy to South Africa, where we look at the coming to terms with the past. Our focus is on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Then the third question, which is a source-based question, we are looking at the end of Cold War and the New World Order, 1989 to present. We were looking at the current world of historical events. After the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, we're looking at the events that unfolded that led to the transformation of the modern trends of life over and across the board. Then we go on to our essay questions. Our focus question number 4 is focusing on the civil resistance again. And our main focus here, we are focusing on the Black Consciousness movement. The ideas of Black Consciousness by Steve Biko, in an attempt to influence Black people to challenge the oppressive rule of apartheid. Then we also have the coming of democracy South Africa, where we focus on the negotiation process that happened between the apartheid government and the Black political movements, which led to the birth of a democratic South Africa in 1994. Then our last question, you'll be focusing on the end of Cold War and the New World Order, where we're looking at events in Russia and how they transformed the South African political terrain. So basically, that's the idea behind our focus areas from paper 2. Right. So we're going to go to our source-based questions. As usual, we must be able to embrace the techniques of answering the source-based questions so that we refrain from practices that are going to disadvantage us in getting the right scores. Like mainly, you are not encouraged to copy sources. You must not copy sources. Where there is need to interpret source information, you cannot copy a source. Where there is need to compare information from different sources, you cannot copy sources. You can only extract information when you are answering level 1 questions. Like you want to list some items given in the source. According to the source, who was this? Then you extract from the source. Quote evidence from the source to suggest, then you quote from the source. But if it's a high order question, you must not copy the sources. Otherwise, it is going to disadvantage you in your score line. Right. So that is just the basic idea of how you must approach your questions and how you must also be in a position to defend yourself and be able to attain a desirable grade. Right, let's go to our questions. We don't want to waste much time. We are looking at our question focus is how did the Black Sash challenge the apartheid regime in the 1980s? We are looking at the Black Sash. We must be familiar with the different movements that were challenging apartheid. I understand you are familiar with most of them. You look at the Black Sash is one of the movements that were put in place, or one of the anti-apartheid organizations that were operating. You must also be familiar with the other movements, because the question focus is going to change. For every exam session, it is going to change. So you must be familiar, besides you knowing the Black Sash, we are looking at movements that were responsible for the challenge against the apartheid regime. So we are saying we have the Black Sash is one focus area that you must know. You can also focus on the UDF, which is the United Democratic Front, which gave birth to the formation of the Mass Democratic Movement. It's also another important aspect of focus area of your source-based questions. Then you can also need to focus on the working of the trade unionism, the trade unions, how they influenced workers to challenge apartheid. Then you can also look at some civic organizations, how they were also organizing themselves to challenge apartheid. Then you can also look at the South African Council of Churches, is also one of the movement. You can also look at student movements, how they posed a challenge on apartheid. So you must be familiar with a number, or you can also look at the end conscription campaign. These are focus areas for question number 1, which you must be familiar with. You must be familiar with some, even all of those areas, because our focus question might change from one organization to another, from one movement to another. So just giving you an outline of what you must be familiar with. Our focus is the Black Sash. We understand the Black Sash was a white women organization which was fighting for the transformation of the South African Constitution, which was disadvantaging the Black community. They were using non-violent means of protest against apartheid. Right, let's go to our questions. Looking at our first question is saying, when, according to the source, was the Black Sash founded? The aspect of when, we are looking at the time factor. That is what we must be looking at. We want to look at the time factor. Our time factor is provided here. We are told that the Black Sash was founded on 19 May 1955. That is our response for the first question. It's an extraction question. So directly, our answer, we got it from the source as it is. It is saying on the 19th of May in the year 1955. Right. Name any two women who were involved in the founding of the Black Sash. Any two women who were involved. This is again an extraction question. We just want to pick any two women who were involved. It says it was founded on 19 May 1955 by, number 1 is Jean Sinclair, number 2 is Ruth Foley, number 3 is Elizabeth McLaren, number 4 is Tesha Pybus, 5 Jean Bosaza, and number 6 Helen Newton Thompson. So we are saying these are our responses: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Out of those 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 women given there or highlighted there. You just need to pick any two from that list. Then that's as simple as that. You are just extracting from the source. You just pick any two from those listed women. Right. We move on to the next question. What, according to the source, was one of the reasons for the formation of the Black Sash? This again is an extraction question. We just have to go to the source and extract relevant information which is answering the question. The question wants us to identify the reason for the formation of the Black Sash. If we go to our source, it talks about they initially, this tells us that they initially campaigned against, it was against the removal of the mixed race voters, known as colored in South Africa, from the voters' roll in Cape Province. That was the initial idea. We understand the colors were afforded voting rights in the Cape Province. They were given an opportunity to participate in the politics of the Cape Province. But however, with the entrenchment of apartheid, they chose to remove them from the voters' roll. That was one of the main causes why the Black Sash got to form. They were fighting against the ideas of removing the mixed race voters from the voters' roll in the Cape region. Right, we're moving on to the next question. Number 1.14, it says define the term constitution. What is a constitution? Right, when we're looking at a constitution, we are saying is a board of principles. Or we can say guidelines. It's a set of guidelines. That set of guidelines, why is it important? The set of guidelines is actually an important. So we are saying our constitution, we are saying it's a board of principles, or it's a set of principles, or we can say it's a set of guidelines. And those guidelines, what are they used for? They set a framework for governance. which give us a framework for governance. And also to determine the rights. And also we have to know the structure of a political entity, a structure of a political entity. So we are saying when I talk of a constitution, we are looking at a board of principles or guidelines that we use as a framework for governance. How must we rule ourselves? We rule ourselves according to principles set in the constitution as a legal framework. So we are saying all ideas of governance, they are drafted in the constitution, and all rights are enshrined in the country's constitution. So basically that's the constitution. So we are seeing this this constitution in the era of apartheid. It was disadvantaging the rights of Black people. It was neglecting the rights of Black people. The principles that were set by the apartheid government, they were pro-white people, and they were anti-Black society and other races which were deemed to be inferior. So that set of principles is what we refer to as a guideline. It gives us a framework for governance, and also it highlights the basic rights for all humans in that particular state in question. Then moving on, the next question is saying how, according to the source, did the members of the Black Sash protest against unfair apartheid government policies? How did they protest against unfair practices? Right. If we check from our source, we have to find the ways of protest that they were using. Right. It is saying here, according to our source, they held regular vigils which were observation sessions. So we are seeing this is one of the ways of protest of challenging apartheid that they were using. They were using vigils as a way of protesting against the government. And also it says they used the privilege of white skin to protest in ways that the Black community could not. We are seeing that their way of protest, it was advantageous to them for their skin color. They were not treated harshly as Black people when they were protesting. So they used those vigils because it was to their advantage that they were white, and they could use such methods of protest, which the government would not treat them equally as Blacks if it were Blacks who were protesting using that same modus operandi. So we are seeing this situation of using vigils. We are saying they were holding observations. Whenever the parliament was in place doing discussions about the future of the country, they will also go and join and wait outside the parliamentary buildings overnight to show their concern, and also with their black sashes mourning the constitution of the country. So they were using those vigils as a way of showing their discontent to the rule of apartheid. Right. The next question, it says, so here we are saying mainly their method of protest is they were using vigils. They will do vigils. Using information in the source and your own knowledge, explain why the past laws were most hated laws. Why did people hate the past laws? The past laws were the most hated. Right. Amongst all the apartheid laws, the past laws were the most hated. Why was it that that particular law was the most hated? Right. For one reason or the other, those laws, they were humiliating. Or we can say they were dehumanizing. It was so humiliating for an African man to be arrested for being in town without a pass, or for a black man to be fined for not having a pass, or for you to be sent back to the rural area for not having a pass. It was so humiliating. So people hated those laws for that reason, that it was a form of humiliating the black man, that you are not a resident of an urban area, you are a resident of a rural area. If you are seen in the urban area without the passes, then you either you meet a jail term, or you meet a fine term, or you are supposed to be taken back to your homeland. So it was humiliating or dehumanizing for that effect. And also, we can say it was also most hated because it limited opportunities of black people. Black people were having poor living conditions in the homelands. Then they were trying to find a way of life in the urban areas. But however, because of the past laws, some of them could not be afforded a chance to get into the city to secure a job. So they hated them because it limited their opportunities. The black people had limited opportunities for that sake because they could not easily access urban areas, and hence they could not also get economic opportunities like getting jobs. For that reason, they hated the past laws. And also it limited free movement. People knew well that South Africa was one nation. And why was it split into the homelands and white areas, which were urban areas? It was so disadvantaging too. The people wanted to move freely around. People were supposed to move freely around, but hence they were limited. Their movement capability was limited because of the past laws. There are some areas that you were not supposed to access for the sake that you are black and you do not have authority to be in that particular area. And yet it was one nation. So for that reason, we can say people became so unhappy, or they became so discontented with the rule of the apartheid past laws. Right. Then moving on to the next question, saying using source 1B, identify 2 women's anti-apartheid organizations in the source from which the Black Sash sought help. This is an extraction question. We just want to look at those 2 organizations. We see they include the African National Congress Women's League. This is one. And also we have the Cape Association to Abolish Passes for African Women. This is 2. So those are our 2 organizations, the ANC Women's League and then Cape Association to Abolish Passes for African Women. Next question is saying, comment on why the number of people seeking help from the Black Sash offices increased between 1960 and 1970. Comment on why the number of people seeking help from the... Right. We are looking at a situation whereby people seeking help are increasing from the Black Sash offices. Right. So what was the reason between the 1960s and 1970s? Why did the number of people who were seeking help increased? We are told that between 1960 and 1970s, the offices were packed with thousands of people seeking help from unjust laws regarding forced removals of communities, segregation, discrimination in education and the workplace and healthcare. Those were the main concerns of people seeking help from Black Sash offices. So the question is saying, why comment on why the number of people seeking help from the Black Sash offices increased between that era. Right. We are seeing the situation here. Our justification why the people increased, the number of people increased, we can justify from the fact that the Black Sash offices had opened a number of advice offices. The Black Sash was growing from 1950s. It was also growing in its influence. So it had opened a number of offices. That is why the number of people who were seeking help increased. It was now easily accessible because of the number of offices which were offering advice, which were opened by then. So by opening a number of advice offices, it also meant that it was easily accessible for the African communities to access those offices, and hence they were accessing them in their numbers because it was now convenient for them to access the offices. And also, it was also the era where the government was entrenching apartheid practices. During that very same time, the government was being ruthless on people. We understand in 1960, the ANC and the PAC were banned. And the government had imposed a state of emergency. So for that reason, it meant that the government had entrenched apartheid. It was now completely enforcing apartheid on every aspect of life. So the complaints were so many. Like you are told in the source that people were going with complaints regarding removals of communities. You look at the first removals because of the Group Areas Act. People were being removed from their communities to areas that were deemed to be their right areas. And also segregation. People were segregated. There was complete separation of people according to the races. Then discrimination in education. You look at the Bantu education system, it was enforced, and it was being enforced during that era. People were complaining against that. People were having grievances against the system. And also in the workplace and healthcare, there was extreme discrimination. So because of the entrenchment of apartheid during that time, it was strongly enforced, and hence people had got a lot to complain about. And hence they visited the Black Sash offices in numbers for that reason. Right. We'll move on to the next question. The next question is saying, explain the concept sit-ins in the context of Black Sash protests, action against the apartheid government. Right, we're now looking at a sit-in as a form of protest. What kind of protest is that? It's a peaceful protest. And how is it done? Being a peaceful protest, non-violent, it's a protest by occupying a space, mainly a public space, to express a concern. Or to raise awareness. Right, we want to look at it in the context of the Black Sash. How were they doing it? We are saying it's a non-violent protest, which is peaceful. And how do you protest? You occupy a space. You go into a space, you sit there to show your concern or to raise awareness to people who are visiting the place. The place mainly is a public space, which is to the attention of the public. If you go there to express your concern by sitting in the public space or you want to raise awareness, that is a sit-in. If we look in the context of the Black Sash, it is said a productive strategy that many members undertook were sit-ins in the commission courts. The 1980s, the exercise provided an insight into the political reality of South African non-white citizens during the century. So we are saying it was a productive way of challenging apartheid that was used by the Black Sash. They would go and sit in the commission's court. Their presence there, it was to show their concern about the situation and also to raise awareness about what was happening in the political terrain of the country. So by merely going to sit there, it was a way of protest which was non-violent. And it was to raise awareness to people who are visiting the same commission courts. And also it was to show their concern to people who are within the commission's court. Right. Then if we look at the next question, what do you think is implied by the phrase? Throughout the 1980s, this exercise provided an insight into the political reality for South African non-white citizens. Right. Our statement, we are taking it from here. Well, throughout the 1980s, this exercise provided an insight into the political reality for South African non-white citizens. It brought an insight into the political reality. What does that imply? It implies that non-white South Africans the non-whites in that matter were subjected to unfair treatment. It brought into the insight to the political reality of South African non-white citizens. It showed that non-whites, the fact that there were people protesting against the constitution, who are mourning the constitution, it implied that there was some irregularity in the constitution of the country, which was a disadvantage to the non-white community. So it actually implied that non-whites were subjected to unfair treatment. Or we can also say it made non-white people realize that there was injustice in the country. There was injustice in the country. The injustice was being practiced upon the non-white community. And also, if you check, the fact that the whites were the ones who were advocating for equality, it also showed that non-whites were realizing the support that they were getting from the whites. They were also realizing the support that they were getting from, because we are saying there was an insight into the political reality for South African non-whites. So throughout that era, we are seeing that the exercise of sit-ins, it provided an insight. It also showed, it also realized the support, it exposed the support that whites had for non-white citizens. For the fact that the citizens, the white people were the ones who were engaged in sit-ins, then it gave an insight, it gave an understanding that the non-whites were being supported by the whites in the fight for the injustice that were happening in the country. Then we move on to the next question. We are going to source 1C. Source 1C is based on a photograph. Our photograph is here. Right, the context is the photograph is from an ebook titled Standing on the Street Corners by Mary Kleinlebeck and Christopher Merritt. It shows the Black Sash members gathering before the Standing for Truth campaign peace march at the Cathedral of Holy Nativity in Pietermaritzburg on the 21st of September 1989. And those are the names of the people present. Right, so the first question is saying, why this photograph was taken. Explain why this photograph was taken. Right, we need to analyze the photograph to identify reasons why the photograph was taken. Right, if we check on the poster that is being held by those women, it says Black Sash supports peaceful protests. So it's one reason why the photograph was taken, to show that the Black Sash was supporting peaceful protests, which meant it was against violent forms of resistance. It was pro non-violent forms of resistance. So it was taken to show that Black consciousness was supporting the idea of peaceful protests. One of the reasons, because we are seeing it there. And also, if you are seeing the fact that it says supports, this is a guideline. Supports who? It also was taken to show that a Black Sash was working in support of other organizations. in the fight against apartheid. It's another idea that you can get from the source to show that Black Consciousness was working in support with other organizations. It was not working in isolation. It was also supporting other organizations which were opposing for non-violent forms of protest, which were advocating for peaceful protests. Or we can also say the photo was taken to show that whites were fighting for the rights of blacks, coloreds, and Indians. Because if you see on our photo, the photo has got those white women, but they are advocating for protests against the very same white government. So it was also a way of showing that there were white people who were also fighting for the rights of blacks and coloreds and Indians who were disadvantaged. It's another idea that you can extract from that particular source. To show membership of the Black Sash, we can also say so. It was taken to show membership of the Black Sash, the influential members who were white. They were shown there in the photograph. Or it was taken to promote the idea of peaceful protest. You can also say that it was taken to promote peaceful protests. Whoever wanted to challenge the apartheid government was inspired by the ideas of Black Sash, which were peaceful ideas. So it was also advocating or promoting amongst the people challenging apartheid to use non-violent and peaceful modes of protest against the government. Right, that's the idea. Move on to the next question. Comment on the usefulness of this photograph to a historian researching Black Sash activism. Comment on the usefulness. Right, let's identify usefulness on that source. When you are figuring out usefulness of a source, remember, we always say usefulness, we are looking at something which is of substance in the source, something which is meaningful, something that you can say you have learned something that makes sense, or that teaches you, or that gives you an insight into a better understanding of some historical aspect of a given event. So in this instance, we are saying this source is useful. Useful to who? The question is saying useful to a historian researching Black Sash activism. Activism of the Black Sash. How did Black Sash do its activism work to challenge apartheid? What were the methods that they were using? How successful were they in their methods of challenging apartheid? So let's try to figure out sense from the photograph and trying to look at some information that we can talk about, which is useful in this instance here. There's our photo. Right. Right, we can say one usefulness, referring back to the methods of protest, it is useful because it tells that the Black Sash supported peaceful protests. It's useful information to get to know that the Black Sash was a non-violent organization. They were in support of peaceful protest means. And also, you can also say it actually gives information on the membership of Black Sash. You can actually get to know who are the members of the Black Sash by merely looking at the photograph there. And also it is useful in the sense that it tells that The Black Sash, it engaged itself in marches. They were also marching, which was a way of activism against apartheid, engaging themselves in marches. It's a useful information that we are getting from the source. So basically, by looking at such information, we can actually be sure that this source is useful for the instances that we have tried to provide there. Right, moving on to the next question. It says, refer to source 1B and 1C. Explain how the information in source 1C supports the evidence in source 1B regarding the role played by Black Sash during apartheid. That is our question. Right. So the main comparison that we are looking at here, we are trying to figure out how Black Sash is portrayed in source 1B, which is also similar to what source 1C says. So if by merely going to the sources, remember we use the format source 1B says this because this is a written source. And this is supported by source 1C, which shows whatever because it's a photograph. Right. It says the Black Sash looked for help from other anti-apartheid. It looked for help from other anti-apartheid organization, women's anti-apartheid organization. How is the idea supported? If it says it looked for help from other, it's supported by the fact that Black Sash as an organization was also acting in support of other organizations who were advocating for peaceful protests. It shows us the support there, which means it was not working in isolation. It was also supporting. While it was also seeking help, it was also supporting on the other end. And if we check, the source is also telling us about the Black Sash being engaged in peaceful protests. Right, we get the idea where it says the Black Sash was engaged in sit-ins. It was engaged in sit-ins. How is the idea portrayed? The idea of sit-in here. This is a peaceful protest. It is also supported. The sit-in is a peaceful protest. It's also supported. It's also shown in the image where it is saying Black Sash supports the idea of peaceful protests against the government. And also it says the Black Sash, one of its main strategies from the beginning was applying pressure on the government by educating the wider public by means of media, via documented protests, pamphlets, Black Sash newspapers, and informational meetings. We are told about the meeting on that. They were attending a meeting on this also. It says Black Sash gathering before standing. There were Black Sash members gathering before the Standing for Truth campaign, a peace march at Cathedral Hall in Pietermaritzburg, and the members are given there. And if you also check here, it talks about using the media, like pamphlets and also the Black Sash newspaper. The same is applied here. The use of media, we are seeing this poster here. It's a form of media which is also supporting the idea of usage of media in their methods of protests against the apartheid government. So basically, you just need to pick some ideas from the two sources and try to figure out how those ideas are portrayed in the other source, how the same idea or the same mode of protest is portrayed in the other source, to show how the sources are supporting each other. And you need not write a paragraph for those questions. Just pick one independent idea and try to figure out how the idea is portrayed in one source and in the other source. As simple as that, by just picking out an independent point. And do not write a paragraph trying to copy the source where the idea is not clear. Just pick one independent clear idea and show how the same idea is portrayed in the other source. Right, moving on to the next question. Referred sources, we are done with that. Consult source 1D. What, according to the source, was the purpose of the laws passed in the 1980s? What, according to the source? We just have to go to the source and extract the information. This is source 1D. Source 1D is talking about a transitional history of the Black Sash and Fed Sal by Monica Ferro Carrero Fernandez, a University of London student. It highlights how the Black Sash were harassed by apartheid police in the 1980s. Right. So our question is saying, what, according to the source, was the purpose of the laws passed in the 1980s? What was the purpose of the laws passed in the 1980s? Right. We are told that the laws, by the 1980s, laws were passed to limit protest to one person outside parliament. That is where we get our response. They passed laws to limit the protest to one person outside the parliament. They were feeling like the Black Sash women were overwhelming them by standing in numbers outside the parliament building. Then laws were amended to only allow for limit protests to allowing only one person outside parliament. That was the purpose of the laws. It's an extraction question. Then number 152, we move on to number 152. 152 is saying, quote evidence from the source that explains the reasons for the arrest of 22 members of the Western Cape region. 22 members, why were they arrested? We just need to extract also from the source. Right. We check where it talks about the 22 members. The second paragraph, it says, on Thursday, 24 August 1989, 22 members of the Western Cape region were arrested. Why were they arrested? They were arrested for holding a mass stand protest in Green Market Square, which was following a public meeting addressed by the national president, Mary Patton, and other speakers. So if we are to quote the evidence there of the reason for the arrest, we are saying they were arrested for holding a mass stand protest in Green Market Square following a public meeting addressed by the national president, Mary Patton, and other speakers. That was the reason for the arrest. Right. Taking it to the next question, it's saying, give evidence from the source that suggests that the Black Sash members were not treated as harshly as Black protesters. The Black Sash members were not treated as harshly as the Black protesters. Right. We go to our source and pick evidence which suggests that the Black Sash members, though they were acting against apartheid, they did not receive equally harsh treatment as the Africans. Right. It says here, however, they merely had their photographs and fingerprints taken, after which they were released on their own recognizance or promises, and the dockets were forwarded to the Attorney General, but no further action was taken. We are seeing the situation here. We are seeing a situation whereby they were protesting, but however, they were, merely had their photographs taken as criminals. They had committed a crime. They only had photographs taken and fingerprints taken, after which they were released on their own recognizances. And the dockets were forwarded to the Attorney General, but no further action was taken. If it was a Black person, they would have taken stronger action, not only taking fingerprints and photographs of people who have committed a crime. They were supposed to be jailed for that effect. But because these were whites, they just assumed that they were doing justice by taking their photographs and fingerprints and forwarding their case. But however, no action was taken on them. It's one suggestion that they were released and no action was also taken of them. Right. And also there's another suggestion that we can also use. It says, most members of the Black Sash were regularly arrested and detained, and their families were harassed by the state. Although they experienced better treatment because of their white skin. They experienced better treatment because of their white skin. It's another suggestion that they were not treated the same as the blacks. Even though they were protesting, they received better treatment. because of their white skin. So that gives us a clue on why the whites were treated better in terms of the police brutality. Right. Moving on to the next question, it says, why do you think that Nelson Mandela recognized the role of the Black Sash upon his release from prison? We are understanding a situation whereby Nelson Mandela is recognizing the work of the Black Sash. Why was it relevant for him to recognize that the Black Sash did quite a good job towards the liberation of South Africa? We are looking at Nelson Mandela here, his perspective. Why was he commending the Black Sash for the job done after his release from Nelson Mandela? Right. For obvious reason, we are saying the Black Sash, it worked towards fairness and ultimately leading to his release. And also we can say the Black Sash can be commended because it gave pressure on the government to implement reform, measures. Right, we're saying it worked very hard towards fairness in the African society, leading to the release even of Nelson Mandela. They were advocating for fair treatment. They were advocating for the constitution to be revised so that there is fair treatment of every individual and uphold of human rights. And also, we can say they gave pressure to the government to implement reform measures. And some of those reform measures are the ones that led to the release of political prisoners, including Nelson Mandela. So if it was not for the work of the Black Sash that gave pressure to the government to think along the lines of introducing reforms, then it was not going to be successful for such individuals to be released non-conditionally. And also we can look at the fact that it supported peaceful protests. The Black Sash was for peaceful protests, which opted to use non-violent methods. And hence the government got to accept some of the ideas that were being posed against itself and had to accept such effects of releasing some of the prisoners. And also we can say it was credited because it worked towards constitutional reforms. For that reason, it was also an effect on the apartheid government to accept constitutional reforms, which also included the release of some of the people who were detained and who were jailed for some political reasons. And also we can say the Black Sash, it also assisted in weakening the apartheid government. So any of those responses, we can give credit to the Black Sash. It assisted in weakening the apartheid government because it was a white organization fighting against whites. It was very difficult for the government to impose harsh restrictions on the organization and also on individuals and also to harass the individuals since they were also white. So it actually weakened the apartheid government because they could not harshly treat the activists who were operating in the Black Sash the same way they were doing to blacks. So it was given credit for that reason that it assisted in weakening the apartheid government since it was a white movement. Right, moving on to the next question. It's a paragraph question. Using the information in the relevant sources and your own knowledge, write a paragraph of about 8 lines explaining how the Black Sash challenged apartheid regime in the 1980s. Right, I will indicate how you must answer this paragraph question, though you can answer it in your own way, in your own understanding. But I will use my own, but the guideline remains the same. Our paragraph question must have a point, which is your answer. Remember, it's a standard paragraph which must be written in PIL format. Then you must explain. Then you go on to give evidence. then you must link back to your line of argument. That is how you must answer your paragraph question for it to be a level 3 question that can give you 6 to 8 marks. Without that, you are going to get a lower level, or if you just extract information from the sources without thinking, then it becomes a problem. You will just be copying sources and you will get a level 1, which is 0 to 2 or 3 marks there, because there is no synthesis of information. You are just copying sources. We are not supposed to copy sources. We are supposed to respond. That is why we attend classes. We are supposed to have information on the black sash. We are supposed to know the working of the black sash, such that we apply the knowledge and then we can only pick evidence from the given sources. Right, what you need to do here, you need to have an answer to the question. The question is saying, explaining how the black sash challenged the apartheid government. How did the black sash challenge apartheid government? In other words, you are saying, what methods were used by the black sash to challenge apartheid? In my answer, I would say, if I am writing this paragraph, I would say the black sash used peaceful methods to challenge apartheid. That's my answer. You can also have your own answer, but my answer is guided by the methods. They were using peaceful methods. They used non-violent forms of protest against the government. That is my answer to the question. Then why am I saying so? I am explaining I need to add further information to peaceful protests. Right. They used non-violent marches. They also educated people. They did vigils on parliamentary buildings to show their concern. I am explaining in my own words. I'm not picking from any source. I'm just explaining my peaceful methods. What peaceful methods did they use? They were engaged in marches, which were non-violent. They were also engaged in educating people. They were also engaged in performing vigils on parliamentary buildings. They were also engaged in sit-ins. We are explaining. Then you go on to pick evidence. What evidence can we find to support the ideas that they were non-violent? They were using peaceful protests. We can say in our evidence, we pick evidence from the relevant sources. Like, for example, they supported peaceful protests. Where are we getting that? On the image. Source 1C is your evidence. You can pick another piece of evidence as you are writing. Members. It says members stood alone outside parliament in one of the sources. You pick the source, you put in brackets. This is your evidence. Then you are going to your link. You can use 3 pieces of evidence according to relevant sources that you have. They opened advice offices. We are supporting the idea that they were not engaged in violence. They were just educating people, giving people advice on what to do if they were faced with an injustice situation. They opened advice offices. Where do we find that? That is source 1B. You have given your evidence, which is coming from the sources. Then you end up your paragraph by linking back to the line of argument. The above methods proved to be non-provocative to the government. And hence, the Black Sash continued with the fight against apartheid. We are linking back to say that they were using non-violent methods. And how did it assist they did not provoke the government to take very serious action on them, and hence they were able to continue with their operations. Or you can link it to show that what you were saying in the essay, it proves a point that those methods were non-violent. How do you prove that? You prove that by showing that whatever you have said in the evidence or in your explanation is a form of non-violent protest. That is a complete paragraph question with your point or your answer to the question, which is independent, and you explain in your own words without quoting from any source. You give your evidence, which is taken from the sources, and you paraphrase your evidence. You don't quote the evidence as it is. You don't take the whole statement as it is. Otherwise, you'll end up writing half a page because some of the statements will be too long. You present the ideas in your own words as you're quoting evidence. You are checking an idea from the source and you present it in your own words. Then you link back to your line of argument or your point or your answer. How is this proving your point that it was peaceful? It proved because it was non-provocative to the government, and hence they continued operating that way. If it was provocative, it was violent, the government was going to take strong action and was going to ultimately restrict the organization. But however, because it was non-provocative, because it was peaceful, they continued to operate that way. That is how you write your paragraph. And that takes us to the end of our first question. We move on to question number 2, which is the TRC. The TRC, we are looking at a context of a question which is assessing, was the TRC able to bring closure to Black South African families on the murders of anti-apartheid activists such as Ntombi Kubeka? Right, that is a case for Ntombi Kubeka, one of the victims of the apartheid regime earlier then. We're going to see what happened to her and the fate that befell her during that time of the ruthless apartheid regime. Right, we are saying here, we need to assess the situation. That is our focus area. You know, most of the questions that come under the TRC, they will be case studies based on the people standing before the TRC, either as victims or as perpetrators of apartheid political related incidents of violence. Right, we are going to look at source 2A. That is our source, which we are going to use to answer the first question. According to the source, when did South Africans witness the first TRC sitting? When? It's a matter of time. We need the time factor here. We go to our source, it's extraction. It says on 16 April 1996. That is when the South Africans witnessed the first sitting of the TRC on the 16th of April. Right, we move on to the next question. What, according to the source, did Black people in particular hope to gain from the TRC sittings? What was the hope for Black people? What were they hoping to get from the TRC sittings? Right, we go to our source, it's extraction. Right, it says, in particular, we're filled with hope and faith that the truth about how apartheid police, they were hoping that they would be able to figure out the truth about how apartheid police had mercilessly tortured and murdered their loved ones would be eventually heard. That was the hope of people. They were filled with the hope and faith that the truth about how the apartheid had mercilessly tortured and murdered their loved ones would eventually be heard. A lot of people lost their loved ones during apartheid, and they didn't know what happened to their loved ones. So they were hoping towards them getting to know the truth about how those police force apparently held such incidents of torture and murder, and where they buried the remains of their loved ones. They were also hoping to understand and get a picture to get closure towards the loss of their loved ones. Right, that was the extraction question. We move on to the next question. Define the term amnesty. This term, we can define it. Remember, when you're defining concepts, we have to address the basic idea. If you are looking at amnesty in the context of the TRC, we are looking at official. What official? We are looking at official pardon, or we can say it's official forgiveness. Given to who? Given to perpetrators. Which kind of perpetrators? Of politically motivated violence. So we are saying the government offered to forgive people. And what kind of people are supposed to be forgiven? People who committed crimes, or we could call the perpetrators. And what kind of crimes? Those were supposed to be politically motivated crimes. That is how fully you can define amnesty. So we are saying the official pardon or official forgiveness, meaning to say the government offered to forgive those people, and on condition that they would have disclosed all the truth of what happened, and also upon the fact that the crime was supposed to be motivated by the politics of the day, and also on condition that the crime was not supposed to be out of proportion. Right, so that is the idea of amnesty. We move on to the next question. The question is saying, name any 3 victims in the source for whom family members still expected justice. This is extraction question. It says, 28 years later, these and other expectations set by the establishment of the TRC yet have to bring a shared justice to the families of, one is Richard Mutasi and his wife Irene Mutasi. We have Dombiku Baker, we have Matthews Palane, we have Philan Dwanje, and many others. So these are the listed members that to whom they still expect justice to be brought to play. So it's extraction. You pick your responses from the given set of names in the source. Explain what is implied by the statement by choosing to either remain tight-lipped about their crimes in the context of achieving reconciliation in South Africa. Explain what is implied by the statement by choosing either to remain tight-lipped about their crimes. Right. We take it to the source and see where the statement is used. Right. It says, perpetrators of this and numerous other killings and disappearances ordered by the apartheid police continue to exercise their right to freedom of speech that came with the birth of the country's democracy by choosing either to remain tight-lipped about their crimes or only reveal drips and drabs of the true extent of their actions against their victims. Right, so our focus is by choosing either to remain tight-lipped about their crimes. That's the focus of our question. What does it imply in the context of achieving a reconciliation? Right. The implication here is if someone is tight-lipped, it meant there is no disclosure. Of information. And hence, there's no reconciliation. People who committed crimes, they are not willing to disclose the crimes that they committed. They are remaining tight-lipped. They cannot disclose the true information, which is going to foster reconciliation. People want to know what happened so that they can get closure and they can forgive, so that we can reconcile and stay together in peace. But the people are not willing to disclose the information. Or we can also say in another dimension, the perpetrators, they are not willing to come before the TRC. They just choose to remain anonymous and not come before the TRC. That is why we're saying they are remaining tight-lipped. And hence, there is no reconciliation there if they are not willing to speak. Or we can say they're not disclosing their instigators. In this instance, we are saying people who committed the crimes, they don't want to disclose the people who were sending them. They were doing that on political missions, but under instruction of some other people. They don't want to disclose those people. They are protecting those identities of people who were sending them. So they choose to remain quiet so that they would not disclose the identities of the instigators. That is basically the implication. So achievement of reconciliation is difficult in a situation whereby people are choosing to opt to not to disclose information, or are not willing to come before the TRC, or they're not willing to disclose the instigators, the people who are sending them to commit such politically motivated crimes. Right. We take the next question. The next question is talking about the source 2B. According to the source, what name was given to the armed wing of the ANC? This is common understanding. It was called the Umkhonto weSizwe, the MK. That was the armed wing of the ANC. Comment on why you think the security branch of the South African police kidnapped and tortured Ntombi Kubeka. Right, if we go to our source, we are told that Ntombi was an anti-apartheid activist and a member of the armed wing of the banned African National Congress, Umkhonto weSizwe. She worked as an operative for the organization and was responsible for coordinating activities between the internal unit and the external unit of the ANC, as well as for coordinating underground activities. The security branch of the South African police regarded Kubeka as a senior ANC member and had classified her as being the leader of KwaMashu ANC branch. In 1987, Ntombi was kidnapped by the Port Natal security branch and interrogated and tortured. Her body was dumped near her home north of Durban. Right, that's the situation. So why were they targeting her? Why did they target Ntombi? Right. The reason why they targeted Ntombi, reasons for target. Why they targeted to kidnapping her and also for torturing. Right, number one, the one and most foremost reason is what? That she was an anti-apartheid. She was an anti-apartheid activist. She was fighting against apartheid. For that sake, they did not want people who were opposing policies of the government. So she was supposed to be kidnapped and removed from society for that reason. And also, we can, in another dimension, she was a threat to apartheid rule. Since she was an underground operationist under the Umkhonto weSizwe, we know that the MK was very prominent and known for sabotage, destroying infrastructure. So she was also a threat to the viability of the government, given that the MK was involved in some sabotage attacks on state infrastructure, which was weakening the state financial standing. As a result, the government was becoming weak and weak because of the threats of sabotage which were posed by the MK. So she being part of that, it was a threat to the apartheid rule. Hence, there was need for them to remove her from society. Or we can say she was targeted so that they would weaken resistance. Her being a leader, if we take the leader away, then it means we are going to weaken the followers. So they wanted also to weaken the resistance. That is why they had to take her and torture her, abduct and torture her for that particular reason. And also we can further say, because she was spearheading sabotage attacks on state infrastructure. That is common knowledge. We know that the MK was responsible for sabotage attacks on infrastructure. So her being regarded as a leader, it meant she was spearheading. She was the one who was leading people doing those sabotage attacks. And hence, they wanted to make an example. Or we can also say they wanted to apparently intimidate fellow members of ANC. There are so many reasons that we can highlight. Or we can also say they wanted to disrupt the connection between the internal wing and people in exile, because we are told that they were operating in underground and they were also facilitating a connection between the internal people operating underground and those who had gone into exile. They wanted to disrupt the system of communication and the continued operation of ANC from exile. There is a lot that we can say there about her abduction. Right, I'll move on to the next question. Right. The next question is talking about comment on why you think the security were answered that one. Why was it important for Ntombi family to give her a funeral and a tombstone? We are told that the remains were found and were exhumed, and hence they had to afford her a decent burial, and also they had to afford her a tombstone. Right. For the sake of humanity, all people deserve to get a decent burial. To afford a decent burial, she was buried by the state security forces in an inhuman way of just dumping her body. Every person deserves rest and deserves to be buried in a proper way. So that is why they had to rebury her and afford her decent burial. And also, we can say, as a way of remembering her or honoring her work, by affording her a tombstone, they will remember her for life because the tombstone will still stay and will still bear her name and whatever happened to her as a way of remembering her. So we can also say it was a way of remembering her and also honoring her work as a dedicated cadre to fight against suppression, and also to afford her soul a rest. We understand if people are buried improperly. That is our African understanding of rituals of burial. If a person is buried improperly, then automatically we assume that they do not rest. They need to be buried properly. So they need to afford her peaceful rest. We can also argue that it was for them a reason to bury her amongst her family members. She was buried just anyhow, anyway, where then a police detective decided to bury her, which was not part of her family. Maybe they have got a special burial place for the family. It meant that they were supposed to bury her amongst her family members and not anywhere else. So they had to afford her a chance to get buried with other fellow members of the family. So we can justify based on our African understanding of reburying the bodies that were improperly buried and also the effect of us having a tombstone. Right. Explain the significance of the statement. Tuli is confronted with a shocking event that risks tears or brings back the bonds of memories. Right. That is a statement which refers to the daughter to the late. It says, Tuli is confronted with a shocking event that risks tears or brings back the bonds of memories. So, by that effect, we are saying, daughter to the deceased, what is she facing? She's always thinking of the fate that befell a mother. It's a tragic thing to understand that you grew up without a mother because she was murdered when you were just as little as 3. Then you get to understand some years later that your mother was murdered by security police and was apparently dumped, and you get to exhume. It's a very worrisome and it's a very disturbing thing that will always visit your mind. Or can say it is shocking for her to discover how a mother was murdered. Years later, she grew up without knowing how her mother disappeared and didn't know where her mother's remains were because that information was not disclosed, only to be disclosed years later. So it's a shocking event that will risk tear, that will bring back the bonds of memories to the people who lost their loved one. So in that instance, that is basically the idea behind the fact of the bonds of the memo memories. We are saying that situation is a disturbing situation, and apparently is going to be a recurring event in the mind that can be deeply embedded in the fact that we are referring to a skeletal structure of someone who disappeared years back without us knowing how the person got to disappear. And apparently we got to get the skeletal remains after exhumation for that effect. Right, we move on to source 2C. Source 2C is based on this poster was published by University of KwaZulu-Natal and features a film screening of the story of ANC activist Dobika Sekubeka. A documentary by a credible filmmaker Infa Samuel focuses on the life and murder of Tombi. The screening was scheduled for 3 to 8 May. Right, it's a poster. Right, well, the question says now, the first question is saying, why do you think this advertisement was published? The advertisement for the poster, why was it published? Right, we can say it was published for the reason of creating awareness. To create awareness, the general public about how apartheid operated. It is to create awareness of how apartheid operated. There are some people who were born after the apartheid era. They also need to understand how the apartheid regime was operating. So it was a way of creating awareness to the people so that they will get to understand the history of the country, how people were treated during apartheid and how people were made, abducted and tortured during that particular time. And also, we can say it was created to try and encourage healing to victims. In another dimension, we can say it was meant to encourage healing of to the victims who were also part of, and also relatives of victims who were murdered during the apartheid era. Or we can say it was also published to encourage reconciliation. In another dimension, we want to restore peaceful relationships. We have to expose all what happened in the past so that we can heal, and at the end we can reconcile and start working together in peace again. Right, for that effect, we can say those are some of the reasons why that advertisement was published. Right. Or also we can say it was published to expose the successful work of the TLC. We understand this case only got to be unearthed after the TLC hearings. If it was not for the sake of the TLC, then it meant that such cases would have been swept under the carpet and would have never been known. But because of the working of the TRC, those people got to know how their loved one got to disappear, and they got to identify where the remains were because of the successful work of the TRC. So we can also give credit to the effect that they want to expose the successful work which was done by the TRC in investigating such cases and coming to the disclosure of some of the hidden information that would have never been exposed if it was not for the sake of the working of the TRC. Right, we move on to the next question. The next question is saying, explain why a historian would consider this source as reliable when researching the life and role of anti-apartheid activist Ntombi Kubeka. Why would you consider that source as reliable? Reliable, we are saying, how can we trust this source? Why can we say this is the truth that we are getting about the life and the role that was played by Ntombi Kubeka? Right. Reliability, just check on aspects of the source. We find out what we can figure out as part of reliability. Right. The first thing that we need to note when you are checking on reliability, remember, you need to look at aspects like who produced the source, what kind of source is it, what is the purpose of the source, when was the source produced. We look at those aspects as part of assessing reliability of a source. So let's try to figure out who produced this source. This source was published by the University of KwaZulu-Natal. It's most likely to be reliable because this is a source which was published by a university. We mostly trust information coming from universities. These are high institutions of learning. We cannot expect to get falsified information from a university. We know, we understand there are learned people in universities. This is basically a thing which is coming from the Department of History out of the University of KwaZulu-Natal. We had people who are well vested in the field of history. So we can trust it because it's a source which is coming from a university publication. And we can also trust it because the documentary, it was by a credible filmmaker, Enver Samuel. We are told he's a very credible filmmaker. It's a documentary by a credible filmmaker. It's also reliability. You can rely on it because it is coming from a credible filmmaker, someone who is known in the industry of films, is known for producing detailed films and meaningful films and truthful films. Right. Then what can you also figure out besides us highlighting on some of those aspects? We can also look at the nature, the purpose of the source. The purpose of this source is mainly informative. It wants to give information about the life and the contribution that was made by Ntombi in the fight against apartheid. So which means it's informative and is not a propaganda source. It's not meant to make people hate apartheid, but it's just to give information on the life of the deceased and also how she contributed towards the fight against apartheid. So we can say it's reliable because of it being an informative source without any propaganda in it. And also, we can also give credit to the source because it says here, ANC activist was abducted and killed by the security branch in 1987. We are checking on the time frame. The abduction happened in 1987. 1987, we understand apartheid was on its height. So we can safely rely because this story is based on an abduction that happened in 1987, during the time that we all know that apartheid was still very active and was on its height, trying to repress any form of resistance. So that is why they got to abduct that particular individual. And also, we can safely rely because it's a reflection by the surviving daughter. Someone who is just close to the person in question. She's a surviving daughter of the person who is deceased, which meant that we can safely rely because it's a source coming from someone who is very close, who had got information about the person in question. Right, that is about reliability. We move on to the next question. Source 2D, explain anti-apartheid activist. When we're talking of anti-apartheid, we are saying it's against. So an anti-apartheid activist is someone working against apartheid principles, or someone who is challenging apartheid, who is actively challenging apartheid. That is an anti-apartheid. Anti meaning against apartheid, and activism is a way of challenging. So we are saying someone who is actively participating in the challenge against apartheid. In the context of South Africa, we are looking at those people who were involved in protests, in either violent or non-violent protests against apartheid, to show their discontent against apartheid. That is an anti-apartheid activist. Indicate according to the source, the evidence given before the TRC Amnesty Committee regarding the death of Ntombi by the following persons. What did Major Hendrik Botha say about the death of Ntombi? We extract it from the source. What did he say about the death of Ntombi? Right, we are seeing here, the police officer led by Major Hendrik Botha told Amnesty Committee of the TRC sitting in Durban that she died of a heart attack as she was a large woman and overweight. That was his claim. He is denying the fact that they made her there. So he's claiming that she actually died of a heart attack because she was a large woman and was overweight. That was his reason. Then the other individual is the lawyer, John Willis. What was the reason by the family lawyer? We are told that represented by their lawyer, John Willis, said she was shot, and when exhumed, a bullet hole was found in her skull. So we are seeing the two dimensions. The family lawyer is saying she was shot, and there was evidence of a bullet hole on her skull. And the apartheid police security officer is saying she died of heart attack since she was an overweight woman. That's the perspective of those two guys, which is completely against each other, which is actually in contradiction of one another. Number 243, it says, comment on why the evidence given by the security police differed from the evidence given by the Kubeka family lawyer. Why are those two perspectives differing? Definitely, the police officer is denying responsibility. The security police is denying responsibility for the murder. He does not want to be implicated in the murder. That is why he's saying she died of heart attack. And then if someone dies of heart attack, how then did they get to be buried somewhere improperly? We know if someone dies out of a natural cause, they're supposed to be buried by their family. Then why did the police chose to dump her body somewhere if she had died of heart attack? That comes another question. And that comes another bone of contention towards the situation. So actually, we can say the security officer is denying responsibility. He doesn't want to be accused for the murder. Court evidence from the source indicating that the two askaris, Simon Radebe and Jim Bane, were working with security police to kill Ntombi. Right, the askaris were the sellouts. Those people who were working on the side of the police and were pretending to be part of the African community. They were soliciting for information and sending information to the security police. And they were facilitating the abductions and the murder of activists and apartheid activists. So these two guys, how is it shown that they were working together with the apartheid government? It says here, two askaris, ANC activists turned police or state informants. Warrant officers Simon Radibi and John Bane assisted the murder of Kubeka, the TRC committee head. The two askaris pretended to be MK members and offered to accommodate activists from Swaziland. What did they do? They lured Kubeka to the arrest, and she died at the hands of Botha and his team. So actually, they pretended as if they were giving accommodation to guys who were coming from Swaziland, and the apartheid activists were coming from exile. They are offered to accommodate them as if they were part of them, and yet they were trying to get people to the hands of the apartheid security forces. That is how they got to lure Kubeka into the hands of the security police, and apparently she died in the hands of Botha and his security team. Right, the next question is saying, referred sources 2B and 2D, explain how the information in source 2D supports evidence in source 2B regarding the manner in which Ntombi was assassinated by apartheid security police. Right, that is simple. We can just get the information. From B, we are saying source 1B says this, and this is supported by source 2D, which says this. Source 2B, if we check, it talks about Ntombi being source 2B. If we got the source quickly, there are things which are comparable, which we can find here. Right, in source 2B, we find information like Ntombi was interrogated and tortured. That is how she was handled by the police. And we can also find support information about her torture, which gives us information that apparently a bullet hole was found in her skull. It's supporting each other. A form of torture, and she was also found with a bullet hole in her skull. And also, if we check, it says here, she was dumped. They were made aware that the family was made aware when Ntombi's bones were buried and were finally able to give a funeral. It says her body was dumped. The body was dumped near a home. And we can also find supporting evidence of the body being dumped somewhere else. It says the police shot her in the head before dumping her body. So it's supporting each other. And also, if you try to check the other information that we can find here, which is supporting of each other, it says here, apparently she died in 1987. It says here, in 1987, Ntombi was kidnapped, and is also supported. The time factor is also supported here. If we check, she died in 1987 when she was 47 years old. So it's supporting each other. So there are so many supporting factors that you can figure out there. We are also told about the fact that her body was found near her home in North Durban. You can also use this. They were made aware where Ntombi's bones were buried. They were made aware of where Ntombi's bones were buried. Talked about the bones, where the bones were buried. And it also supported here. It shows us that they exhumed the remains, supporting each other. They got to know where the bones were and they had to exhume them. It's supporting each other. They wouldn't have exhumed if they didn't know where the remains were. So that is what you basically have to use. You have to use just a simple independent example that you find there, and you also show how it is portrayed in the other source. Right, that takes us to the next question. The next question, which is the last question on number 2, is a paragraph question. I will also highlight how I was going to answer this question if I was part of the exam group. Right, as usual, again, our question comes in the PIL format where we are supposed to answer with a clear point, answering the question. We give an explanation, we give evidence from the sources, and we give the linking statement. We explain, then we give evidence or give examples, then we give a linking statement at the end. Our point, the question is saying, what is the question? Explaining whether the Truth and Reconciliation was able to bring closure. It's your own discretion. Was the TRC able to bring closure to Black South African families? You can say it did not bring closure. It failed to bring closure. It depends with your argument. Or you can say it actually brought closure. In my instance, my independent response, I would say the TRC brought closure. To Black families. That is my answer to the question. I am advocating that the TRC brought closure to families. That is my independent response. And I must support that. Why am I saying it brought closure? I need to explain how it was operating in an attempt to bring closure. Right. We understand the TRC was guided by the TRC Act. That is my argument. Why am I saying it brought closure? There were guidelines that they were using in their operations. How were they operating? They were using those 3 arms of the TRC. They thoroughly investigated cases. The human rights violations, it actually thoroughly investigated on cases of murder and abductions that happened during apartheid. And also, we can say they were in a position to offer rehabilitation. They were able to rehabilitate the victims, taking them back into society. They were able to take the perpetrators back into society, restore friendly relationship. They were able to reconcile people who had wronged each other from the past. And through the amnesty body, they were also able to offer amnesty to deserving candidates, not to everyone. We are trying to explain the fact that they were able to reach closure. This is my explanation. I'm trying to explain on the working of the TRC according to the principles. They were guided by the principles. They were supposed to thoroughly investigate cases through the human rights violations. They were investigating cases. And also through the rehabilitation and reconciliation. They were supposed to reconcile people who had wronged each other, and they were also supposed to rehabilitate people back into community. And through the amnesty, they were also supposed to offer amnesty to those who were deserving to be forgiven. We are seeing the fact here. We're explaining how the TRC was operating. Then we go on to pick evidence now from the sources. There's a lot of evidence that you can now use from the Kubeka incidents here. For example, you can say the TRC was able to hold its first sitting in 1996, which showed that they were doing their job in the attempt to bring closure to families by engaging in the sittings of hearings. That was from source 2A. You quote the source. And also you can say, Ndombi's family got to know where the remains were buried. It's another evidence that you get in source 2B. You are giving examples of that particular family. And the family were able to afford a funeral for the deceased. A funeral was held and a tombstone, which showed that the family were getting towards closure of their lost loved one. Source 2B. This is your evidence. Then you link back to line of argument. Whatever you were saying here is clearly supporting that the TRC was able to bring closure to black families. If you are against the idea, then you're supposed to explain the failures of the TRC. And you're supposed to highlight examples of failures. But in this instance of our case, we cannot blame the TRC for handling this case in this way. It was to a greater extent successful in handling this case. So we cannot actually say the TRC was unsuccessful because it failed to handle this case as an example of the Kubeka family. Right. We move on to the next part. We're going to do question number 3 quickly. That is part of events after 1989, the modern events. We're looking at e-commerce giants which are affecting the retail industry of South Africa. Right. Let's go through the questions quickly. Right, this is basically a modern economics or modern business situation, modern political situation question. So this one is based on the business environment and the economic environment of South Africa, which is being affected by electronic retailing, which is the modern trend. Right, the first question is saying, why according to the source, yes, the South African retail industry been facing challenges in the recent years? Why, according to the source, yes, it's been facing challenges. Right, in recent years, South African retail has been facing unprecedented challenge. Retail online giants, Temu and Shein, have stormed. Retail online giants like Temu and Shein have stormed the market, disrupting the local retail landscape and posing a significant threat to homegrown businesses. That is the reason we're having Temu getting in the retail business and apparently taking over the market share of those local retail businesses. And hence, they are now having a serious challenge by being exposed to unfair competition from those giants. That is the first effect. Moving on to the next question, it is saying, Identify and two international e-commerce companies mentioned in the source. International e-companies that are mentioned here, it's clear. We have them here. They are mentioned clearly in the source. The source suggests that we have two giants who are destabilizing the market from the local retail. We have Temu and we have Shein. Those are the two. Right, the next question is saying, explain in your own words why e-commerce companies are a looming or approaching threat for the survival of local brands. Why are local brands threatened by the coming of e-commerce retailers? Right. We want to compare e-commerce retailers versus the local. Right. E-commerce, they can supply cheaper products compared to local manufacturers. Local producers cannot compete with this in terms of price. Shein can supply products which are very cheap compared to our local suppliers. Or Temu can supply products which are very cheap compared to the local suppliers. For that reason, they threaten the local, and also for a reason that they enjoy economies of scale. They are able to do business on a large scale, and at the end, they reduce their average cost of production for the products. And at the end, they are able to sell products at a cheaper price because of economies of scale, which cannot be enjoyed by our local producers who are having business on a medium to small scale. And we can also argue that they can sell better quality products compared to our local suppliers. They can be able to supply better quality products compared to the locals, and hence the locals cannot compete. And also it's a threat because they dominate the local market, or they dominate the market share. More people are willing to buy from the e-commerce suppliers, unlike from the local producers, and hence they lose customers, our local businesses, for that reason. Right, quote from the source, the measures taken by the South African Revenue Services to address, quote from the sources, the measures taken by the South African Revenue Services to address the imbalance in the retail industry. We just want to go to the extraction of the evidence. We want evidence to support that the measures that were taken by to address the imbalance. What did SARS do to address the imbalance? We are told that SARS, to address this disparity or imbalance, the SARS is set to implement new tax regulations from 1 July 2024. What are the regulations? These changes will impose a 45% import duty tax plus value-added tax on all clothing parcels, closing the tax loophole that Temu and Shein have exploited. That is the measure to address the imbalance. They've taken a measure to impose a 45% import duty plus value-added tax on all clothing parcels as a way of addressing the issue of market takeover by the e-commerce guys. Right, it says, using information in the source and your own knowledge, explain how the tax initiative will benefit South African retail industry. How will South Africans benefit from the tax initiative? The benefits. We understand that if there is a tax initiative there, it means it is going to make the tax initiative will make imports expensive. Importation of those goods is going to be expensive, so it's a benefit to the local producers, and therefore, compared to the local products, we are going to say the demand for local products is going to increase, for the reason that imports are now expensive, it means people will prefer buying local products, and hence the demand for local products is going to increase. And also, we are looking at it being, it will reduce what we call the marginal propensity to import. The need for people to buy goods from outside is going to be reduced by the tax initiative. It's now complicated for you to import products rather than buying from the local market, and hence it is going to benefit our retail industry because of that reason. By the fact that local products become cheaper than imported products because they now have a 45% additional cost, which comes in the form of a tax. Right. Moving on to the next question, we are looking to source 3B. Name the South African multinational group mentioned in the source. We just extract what the South African multinational group is. Naspers is mentioned there. Next question, define the term reindustrialization in your own words. Reindustrialization, when we are reindustrializing, we are looking at a way when we are trying to revitalize. Or what can we say? We can use the term reviving. Industrial and manufacturing sector. In other words, we are saying we are boosting industrial productivity. We are revitalizing, we are reviving industrial capacity to produce manufactured products. That is the idea behind reindustrialization. Right, comment on the significance of the statement. Such a scenario threatens the vitality or the strength of the local economy and undermines sustainable development efforts. Such a scenario threatens the vitality or the strength of the economy. What are we saying here? If you are saying it's being threatened, the vitality, in other words, you are saying the South African economy is loses out to competitors. The economy is losing out to competitors. Or we can also say it will lead to low economic growth for the economy. It's going to grow slowly. And also we can say it threatens sustainable developments of the economy. There is no guarantee that the economy is going to sustain in the future because of the situation that is there. If our industrial capacity is threatened by the coming of cheaper imports, and then it sustains that the long-term economic growth purpose is not going to be realized. We are not going to achieve long-term economic growth. We are going to fail to attain sustainable development because the overall economic development is based on local production, which boosts the level of GDP and also which supports local producers to employ more people. And hence, through the multiplier effect, it leads to the development of other sectors. And hence, if it is not guaranteed, then it's a threat to viability of the economy in that dimension. Then looking at the next question, according to the source, which are the two brands that are owned by TGF? This is an extraction question. TGF is here, which it says TGF, which owns brands such as Poshin and Besh. Those are the two brands which are owned by TGF. Right, going to the next question. Why do you think this photograph was taken? That photograph there, why do you think it was taken? It says it's a research from an article by TF Fund in New Zealand. It shows a worker who is actually in the clothing factory. Why was the photograph taken? That is the question. Why do you think the photograph was taken? Right, if we check that photograph, we can try to figure out Before we look at that, there is a question that also we need to look at, the comparison question. I think I've mistakenly skipped that question. It says, refer to source 3A, explain how the information supports. This is supporting evidence between the two sources. You can figure out the supporting evidence there. Like, for example, source 3A talks about the disruption caused by local retails. Source 3A talks about the disruption. It says the local industry has been disrupted by the coming of disruption here. It is supported by source B, which is talking about the loopholes. It has taken advantage of the loopholes, which means it's disrupting. There's a chance for it to disrupt. It's a supporting evidence. And you can also look at the looming threat is also shown by the fact that it is saying it's a looming threat in this source. The coming of these businesses, it's a looming threat, is threatening the viability of the businesses. And however, it's supported here by the fact that it also shows that it is posing significant challenges to the development of sustainable domestic industries. So you just figure out evidence which is shown and which is portrayed the same from the two sources. Right. Our focus, we're looking at this source. Why was this taken? That is the question. Why do you think this photograph was taken? Right, the reason why this photograph was taken, ultimately we can say it was taken to show the exploitation of the clothing retail, the factory workers in the retail industry, in the clothing manufacturing industry, to show the exploitation of workers in the factories in clothing manufacturing. And also, what can we say? We can say it was taken as to show as a way to promote local brands, to try to encourage people to buy local brands. Or you can say the photograph was taken also to show the threats posed by e-commerce. Because if you check here, he's saying the dark side of our love affair with Temu and ultra fast fashion. It is actually highlighting that these ones are threatening the viability of local producers. So it's also meant to show the threat which is being posed by those guys in e-commerce. Then we go on to the next question. It says, comment on the meaning of the slogan, the dark side of our love affair. The dark side, it shows us that apparently is the negative implications of associating with Temu, or the dangers that are linked with associating with the e-commerce guys. Or you can also say it is actually the threats of associating with Temu and fast fashions. That is the implication there. That's the meaning. Explain the limitation of this source to a researcher studying the exploitation of workers. It's limited in the sense that it is biased. It's one-sided. It's only focusing on the factory workers. There's no side of Temu and the other e-commerce guys. So it's biased in that sense. And also we can say it's limited because it's a propaganda source. If we check, it is focusing on portraying Temu and ultra fashions as bad. So there's propaganda there. It is also limited because does not give clear working conditions. We are only seeing one worker there. There's no evidence of exploitation for that particular worker. And there's no implication of Temu on that particular worker. We're only seeing one worker who is appearing to be working well. And also we can say it's limited because factory workers had been exploited. even before the coming of Temu and online ultra fashion. All those, we cannot say it, we blame the exploitation of workers to the coming of Temu, but the workers had been exploited since the beginning of time. It is according to history that the workers had been exploited even without the influence of those guys. Right, name the trade union mentioned in the source. Our trade union, we find it here. The Southern African Clothing and Textile Workers Union. The concept petition in the context of tariff hikes. When people are petitioning, they are giving out their signatures to show support to a concern. You sign a petition, you give out your signature to show your support to a concern. In this instance, people were concerned about tariff hikes. They were not in support of the hike of tariffs. They were for the idea that the tariffs were not supposed to be hiked. That was the petition. They did not show their approval for the tariff hikes. So they were giving out their signatures as a way of showing that they did not approve the tariff hike. 253, according to the source, which initiative was launched in 2019. The initiative that was launched in 2019, we find it here. It is saying, in 2019, the South Africa's retail clothing, textile, footwear, and leather master plan was launched in 2019. This is the initiative in 2019. Using information in the source, according to the source, we talked about that. Using information in the source and your own knowledge, explain how South African retail clothing, textile, footwear master plan has strengthened the local industry. Right, we are told that this initiative is effective in ensuring the right tariffs. By ensuring the right tariffs, it means they are protecting the local producers by making sure that all products which are imported are supposed to have a tariff imposed on them, and hence they would not effectively compete with the local products. And also, in another way, they are ensuring that goods are not misclassified, so that the right duty is imposed on the right product. And also, they are also working to ensure proper import control measures to make sure that the local market is not flooded by unwanted products. And also to limit, they're also limiting under invoicing. Goods are supposed to be invoiced correctly so that the right duties are levied on the products. And also we can say they are trying to limit smuggling of cheaper products so that we don't have a flooding of cheaper products on the local market. Right, that is what we can say. Then the paragraph question, you just pick your idea, explain how international e-commerce giants affect the retail industry. How do they affect? In your point, you must indicate whether it's positive or it's negative. In my instance, I will say they've negatively impacted on the retail industry. Then in my explanation, I will say they are leading to the flooding of the local market by cheaper products. Domestic producers cannot match the prices, and hence they are being driven out of business. And this is ultimately affecting the viability of the sector and also is leading to unemployment and exploitation of workers. That's my explanation. Then I'll pick evidence from the sources to support my idea of negative implication. Then I will link back to show that the fact that factory workers are now being exploited, it actually gives a clear impression that it is because of the contributory factor of cheaper products on the market that local manufacturers are trying to catch up with the competition which is being posed by e-commerce. I will end my paragraph like that. Right, we're going to quickly discuss through the essay questions, just giving you insights on how you were supposed to answer those questions. My main focus is focusing on the question number 5. Since this question here, it's a critical discussion question, it needs clear elaboration on how you are supposed to answer the question. The question is saying, critically discuss how Steve Biko and the Black Consciousness Movement empowered Black South Africans to stand up for themselves against apartheid regime in the 1960s and the 1970s. It's a critical discussion question. Right, we're going to look at how we answer the questions. I know you have the responses and you have the answers. The responses are basically the same, but the approach is what matters. Right, what must you do with a critical discussion question? What you must do with a critical discussion is your introduction. It must show a critique. How must it show a critique? It must have a critique because it's a critical discussion, which means it must have a dual line of argument. Your main line of argument must approve the statement. Show that Black consciousness was a positive move towards helping Black people. Then, your minor argument, it must show a disapproval, which is the negative implication. You can criticize Black consciousness, how it failed to effectively challenge apartheid, or you can give credit to other movements which were not operating under Black consciousness, which were also very effective in challenging apartheid. That is your line of argument. Then you give reasons. This is one. Number two, you give reasons. Reasons for approval. Why are you saying Black consciousness had a positive impact in helping Black people challenge apartheid? Maybe you can say Black consciousness, it changed the mindset of Black people to realize their self-worth. Then how? You also give another reason for disapproval. Though Black consciousness assisted in Black people challenging apartheid, it was not very effective because it did not have proper monitoring structures. To monitor the progress, you can argue like that. It did not have proper monitoring structures to check on the progress of the challenge against apartheid. You are giving dual reasons. Reasons for approval and reasons for disapproval. You are giving general reasons. Then you give an elaboration. What are you going to express in the essay? What is the essay going to prove? What historical evidence are you going to prove or to use in the essay? That is your introduction. And if you do this, your introduction is contextualized. It's a contextualized introduction for a critical discussion. Without this, your introduction is not giving a purpose of answering the question. It must have a main line of argument and a counter argument. It must have reasons for the main argument and reasons for the counter argument. And it must have an elaboration of what you are going to pose. Right. So I'm going to just highlight on what you can use in the essay as your argument. Right. You can argue on the side, positive side of Black consciousness, creating paragraphs of these ideas. You can start by explaining Black consciousness as a philosophy, how it assisted Black people to change their mindset. Act with pride. How did Black people were supposed to reject pride, a sense of self-pity. Then you can also go to Steve Biko, breaking from SASO to form SASIM from the NUSAS. You explain how it influenced the Black students. Then you also talk of community projects as another idea, how Black people became self-reliant through community projects. You give examples of the community projects. You explain the influence of Black consciousness movement on labor. You cite examples of strikes that were very effective to challenge apartheid. For example, the Durban Tile Workers, you talk of the Black Allied Workers Union, how it influenced workers to challenge apartheid. You can also look of Black consciousness on the media, how Black consciousness ideas were spread through the media. You can give example of the Black Review as an example of a publication that was very effective to reach the African society, to conscientize them of the Black consciousness ideologies. Then you can also talk of the Frelimo rallies, how South Africans were celebrating on behalf of Mozambique's independence, and also showing the apartheid government that the wave of independence was in the region. Then you can also talk of the influence of SASIM in high school, how high school learners were infused with the ideas of Black consciousness through the coming of student teachers from universities. Then you can also look at other ideas like the rejection of Afrikaans as a medium of instruction. Learners refused to accept Afrikaans as a medium of instruction in schools, which apparently showed that they were emancipated and they were empowered with the idea of self-pride. They wanted to adopt their own languages and not use the language of the oppressor. You can also give credit to the Soweto uprising, to Black consciousness, how learners got to protest against unfair Bantu education system. Those are some of the ideas where you can create paragraphs. But however, since this is a critical discussion, you also need to point critique of Black consciousness. You can give credit to the ANC and PAC, though they were operating underground because they were banned. But however, through the MK, the ANC was very effective to challenge apartheid through sabotage. You can give credit to that. Also, you can criticize the Black consciousness that it did not have proper structures. They did not monitor the progress of the challenge, to monitor and evaluate if it was successful. They were just infusing people with a sense of pride, with self-identity, without monitoring if it was successful. So they did not proper monitoring structures. You can criticize them for that. And also you can say the BC ideas, it ignored the diversity of African cultures. It was only focusing on blacks having to revitalize their culture. But the cultures were different. We had different ethnic groups. We had different cultures. We had the Zulu people, we had the Xhosas, we had the Pedi. They had different cultures. So which culture was being supposed to be embraced? They were not very clear on which culture and how they were supposed to embrace those cultural aspects. It was not very clear. It was vague in its operation. And also, we can also look at the ANC, the Black consciousness over-reliance on psychological aspects. They were just focusing on changing the mindset of the people without actually getting into play, into physical aspect of fighting against oppression. And also, we can also look at the Soweto uprising. We cannot completely say the Soweto uprising was a product of Black consciousness. There were other fueling factors in the townships. People were upset because of unemployment and also because of poverty. People were not happy with the government. So we cannot say it was because of Black consciousness that people got to uprise before the government, because they were influenced by Black consciousness. They were also unhappy because of the provision of services in township, which was very poor, the issue of corrupt councillors in the townships, the issue of poverty, which was rampant in the townships, the issue of unemployment. People were unemployed in the township. So they were very discontent. They were very unhappy with the situation. And hence, they got to uprise against the government. So that is basically how you must balance your argument. Right, that is the first question. You conclude your argument by tying up with the relevant conclusion. You reaffirm key points and you conclude your argument. Then this question here, of an extent, what you must do here is you must just show the extent, of your argument, greater extent in this instance. Then, why are you saying to a greater extent? You show that there was, the question is saying, road to democracy was characterized by a combination of challenging circumstances, which ultimately led to the negotiating settlement. So you highlight that there were challenging circumstances here. There were negotiations, compromises by various political players. At the same time, there was disturbing violence. That is your reason. Then you elaborate. Your introduction is contextualized. What are you going to show? What are you going to prove in the essay? Then in your essay, you have to show a series of negotiation processes. I know you have the sequence starting from de Klerk's speech in Parliament opening and the release of Nelson Mandela. That is the beginning. Then you go through the processes explaining how there was compromise by different political players, others rejecting to get through the negotiation process and others opting to compromise. The Krutska minute, you go to the Pretoria minute, you go to the record of, you go to Codesa 1, Codesa 2, you look at the disturbing violence in Baipathong, you look at all those disturbing violences in the Rand area where there was sabotage by the Umkhonto weSizwe and withdrawal of the ANC in some instances, the refusal of Mangosuthu Buthelezi to join the negotiation process, the IFP refusal to participate, that was disturbing instances, until we get to the last step of a democratic election in South Africa. That is basically your focus for that particular essay. You have to focus on the steps of negotiations and you focus on the disturbing violence, which was almost hindering the negotiation process. For example, the record of understanding came after the withdrawal of the ANC from the negotiation process. It was the compromise which was determined by Cyril Ramaphosa as the secretary for the ANC and also Rolf Meyer as the Minister of Constitutional Development from the side of the National Party. Those are events that you highlight and show the extent of sacrifice which was offered by individuals at the expense of the violence which was disturbing the negotiation process. Right. Then the last question is based on the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989. It was a catalyst for the political transition that occurred in South Africa. Do you agree? You must show your agreement for that particular question. Question number 6. You must agree. And in this instance, don't use the first person. It is in agreement that the fall of the Soviet Union led to the catalyst in the negotiation of South Africa, or it is agreeable. Why are you agreeing? It's because of the fall of communist ideologies facilitated democracy across the world. The fall of the Berlin Wall, it was a significant event, a turning point towards the abolition of communist practices. And apparently South Africa had to engage in a dimensional way of negotiation with the apartheid government to negotiate with the black political movements. Then you elaborate on what you're going to say. This essay is going to relate events in the fall of the USSR and how it transformed South African politics. That is where now you focus on aspects of the fall of the Soviet Union and you relate it to how it influenced South African politics. You look at the coming of Gorbachev as a key player in the fall of the Soviet Union, who was now a new leader who came out with new ideas, which brought in a liberty to South Africa because of the adoption of the new ideas. So you look at the influence of Gorbachev, the coming in of Gorbachev into Russian rule, who wanted to modernize the economy by introducing predominantly the perestroika, which was openness. People were supposed to operate in openness and not in a situation of closeness whereby facts were hidden. And also he looked at the self-governance, the economy through the perestroika, and also adoption of a modern economy. Right? Then also look at openness, which was the idea of the glasnost. These were the basic ideas. The perestroika to modernize the economy, move away from old economies, which were non-functional and which were non-performing, adopt new ways of economics which are viable. Be open. Let's adopt the glasnost, which opts for openness in our operations. Then you look at the transformation of small scale private ownership, moving away from government ownership, and how it influenced production in Russia. People were allowed to criticize the government. Critique was allowed. It also opened way for the apartheid government to allow for democracy. If in Russia the government was allowing for critique, government were allowing people to criticize the economic system and the working of the government, it also implied that in South Africa, the government was also made to open its eye towards adoption of a new way of governance, which allowed for the people to criticize its operations. Then Russia was no more a superpower, and also that transformed into South Africa. And communism, because of the coming of Gorbachev, was no longer regarded as a threat. It was no more a threat to capitalism because of the effect of the fall of the ideas of communism. So you relate to the ANC's operations, the ANC operating from exile and until ANC got to get into South Africa, and also its stance against the apartheid regime. Then we look at the loss of the South African in the Battle of Quito Carnival. It's also an important point as a turning point. South Africa had to withdraw from Angola after a stalemate in Quito Carnival, and also had to withdraw from Namibia, which was paving way for democracy in South Africa. The Namibians realized their liberation because South Africa had to withdraw from taking Namibia as its protectorate. Because of the declarations after the Battle of Quito Carnival, South Africa had to withdraw from Namibia. And that paved way also for withdrawal from Angola. We are looking at South Africa also withdrawing from Angola after the stalemate of the Battle of Quito Carnival. It led also to the opening of negotiations in South Africa. The economy was crumbled because of sanctions by that time, and hence the coming of de Klerk, he adopted moderate approaches to the politics of South Africa, and hence he opted to offer for a democratic South Africa with peaceful resolutions. They opted to release Nelson Mandela and opted away for negotiations. And apparently that led to South Africa becoming a democracy at the end. It reformed business measures and also tried to ease unrest in South Africa, because remember, there was widespread unrest, people fighting against the apartheid government, sabotaging, people engaging in boycotts against the apartheid government. So all those acts, they affected the government's viability. They affected the sources of revenue for the government, and it forced the government to adopt to a new way of negotiation with the black political movements. And most importantly, what you must note here, you must give credit to the coming of F.W. de Klerk after P.W. Botha suffered a stroke. Because P.W. Botha was more of a radical. He did not want to adopt a moderate approach to the politics. He wanted to adopt an extreme approach of apartheid. But however, the coming of F.W. Klerk, we give credit to his coming into office. He started to ultimately adopt a new approach based on the ideas that had happened in the change in the transformation of the Russian politics. So we see that going on, and we see the coming of elections in South Africa, which led to the transformation of South Africa from an apartheid state to a democratic state. That is basically the picture. Then you tie up your argument to show that the events apparently are the events that also transformed the politics in a modern South Africa. So that's the idea behind this particular paper. According to my analysis, as I went through the paper, apparently I can say this is a moderate paper where an average learner can score an average mark above 90 out of 150. Because the language that is used in this paper is fair language. We cannot say there are complicated terms or there's some complicated English that is used here in these sources. The sources are just simple, and they are very easy to understand, and they are very easy to interpret. So this is an average paper according to my evaluation. And I do expect that if your final examinations might come with this setting standard, it is most likely that we are going to have quite a greater percentage of distinctions in the final examinations. So with that being said and done, I can safely conclude that we have come to the end of our discussion. And as usual, keep checking on the website, keep checking on the spot. We are going to give you more sessions on history. We're going to give you more practices. We're going to give you more lessons to elaborate on some aspects. It's not only revision of question papers and not only a discussion of memos, but it's also that we are going to give you a variety of the history learning spectrum. Either we are doing some source-based interpretation, we are doing some essay interpretations, we are doing content analysis, we are doing past paper practices, and all those sorts, so that by the end of the day, you are empowered with knowledge on how to tackle every difficult situation in history, so that you are able to maximize and get the best possible mark that can be achieved in any exam. Right, so we are ending our discussion. We hope to meet in other coming sessions of discussions. Your host in history, Chiru, we meet in other discussions. Thank you for watching. Good day, learners. Welcome to another exciting discussion, a discussion on history, paper 2. We are solely based on the preparatory examinations for Gauteng province. We are going to go through this paper 2, our history paper 2, and we are going to try to elaborate and try to assist each other on how best we would be possible. It will be possible for us to get the right answers for the given questions. Right. So that's our paper, and as usual, we understand our paper 2 has the same structure as paper 1. We have 3 source-based questions, and we also have 3 essay questions. And our focus for paper 2, we understand, for question number 1, it's we're looking at civil resistance, which is from the 1970s to the 1980s. We are looking at the crisis of apartheid in the 1980s. Our focus area, we are looking at the different formations that were put in place by the South African community in an attempt to challenge the apartheid regime. Then question number 2 is the coming of democracy to South Africa, where we look at the coming to terms with the past. Our focus is on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Then the third question, which is a source-based question, we are looking at the end of Cold War and the New World Order, 1989 to present. We were looking at the current world of historical events. After the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, we're looking at the events that unfolded that led to the transformation of the modern trends of life over and across the board. Then we go into our essay questions. Our focus question number 4 is focusing on the civil resistance again. And our main focus here, we are focusing on the Black consciousness movement. The ideas of Black consciousness by Steve Biko, in an attempt to influence Black people to challenge the oppressive rule of apartheid. Then we also have the coming of democracy South Africa, where we focus on the negotiation process that happened between the apartheid government and the Black political movements, which led to the birth of a democratic South Africa in 1994. Then our last question, you'll be focusing on the end of Cold War and the New World Order, where we're looking at events in Russia and how they transformed the South African political terrain. So basically, that's the idea behind our focus areas from paper 2. Right. So we're going to go to our source-based questions. As usual, we must be able to embrace the techniques of answering the source-based questions, so that we refrain from practices that are going to disadvantage us in getting the right scores. Like mainly, you are not encouraged to copy sources. You must not copy sources. Where there's need to interpret source information, you cannot copy a source. Where there's need to compare information from different sources, you cannot copy sources. You can only extract information when you are answering level 1 questions. Like you want to list some items given in the source. According to the source, who was this? Then you extract from the source. Quote evidence from the source to suggest, then you quote from the source. But if it's a high order question, you must not copy the sources. Otherwise, it is going to disadvantage you in your score line. Right. So that is just the basic idea of how you must approach your questions, and how you must also be in a position to defend yourself and be able to attain a desirable grade. Right, let's go to our questions. We don't want to waste much time. We are looking at our question focus is how did the black sash